You know, the guide says in the first paragraph, I can only ask you again and again to tune into the deeper meaning of your path and the community you are in the process of creating. Now, I think that he means, well, of course, this was 1976. But you know, the Pathwork community really, I think, stands outside of time. You know, we're always creating the community. He says, just to continue with that thought, page 3, you can start with your own life, and from there go on to take the full responsibility for your planetary citizenship, for being a bringer in of the new age. So that, I think, is also addresses what he talks about when he talks about the community you are in the process of creating, right? I mean, globally, right? We are trying to bring in a new age in spite of a lot of static, right? Difficulty, hard times, but it's up to people like us, people who pursue our spiritual path, to stand up and try to bring that in, to bring that energy in, to allow that energy to manifest. So before the guy talks about leadership and what characterizes leadership, on page 1, he talks about a number of other things. Second paragraph, you often experience that life or people actually give you the best and most longed for gifts, but you find yourself unable to take them in. Now, that's something we can all relate to, I think, right? I mean, how many times have we been in situations where someone or something which was trying to give something to us, we couldn't take it in, we didn't realize it, right? Only later did we see that we were resisting taking something good in that we could have benefited from. So many of these paragraphs really kind of encapsulate the Pathwork process. In the second paragraph, in the open, vulnerable state, you fear the pain of negative experiences that may come to you from outside. Sorry. Anyway, what was I? In the open, vulnerable state, you fear the pain of negative experiences that may come to you from the outside. At the same time, you also realize now that the beauty, love, truth, and wisdom can also be taken in from the outside, and that as long as your defenses are intact, you also prevent yourself from taking these in. So the Pathwork, right, it calls upon us to be vulnerable, to let our defenses go, and to not be afraid of taking things in. And in this lecture, the guy talks about opening to the outside and also opening to the inside, opening to our deeper level, our deeper selves. And here again, in the next paragraph, he says, only when your higher self functions, when you're free from self-serving, selfish attitudes, when you're true to your inborn integrity and decency, when you follow the divine laws of the universe, which are laws of justice, truth, wisdom, and love, can you be strong enough for real, genuine protection, assertion, and confrontation. Only then can you be free from guilt and therefore from anxiety and insecurity, from confusion and fear, which are the only reasons for not being able to defend yourself against abuse. So this lecture, as so many do, gives the core Pathwork message that you have to open yourself up, well, not only to the good things that you can't take in or that we're having trouble taking in, but to your own recognition of your own negativities and blindness and stubbornness, because it's those things that prevent us from unfolding, right? Okay, that's page 1. Then he goes into the discussion about leadership, like what leadership is. And I think that leadership is primarily giving. right? That's what he says. He says a leader has to be able and prepared to give a lot. I mean, that's kind of struck me as an outstanding. I mean, isn't it so that when you have an opportunity to give, like in a job, for instance, and you do it selflessly, then you automatically become a leader? It seems to me that that's the way it works. I think that allegedly Ronald Reagan had his favorite quote on his mantelpiece. It said something like, "There's no limit to what you can do or how far you can go if you don't mind who gets the credit." That's not exactly the same thing, right? But I mean, if you are selfless, you don't care that you're the center of things, and you take the initiative to give, I think that's one of the ingredients for true leadership. Anyway, on page 2, he talks about the conflicting attitudes toward leadership. And I think that most of us have felt these, right? I mean, I certainly have. You envy leadership in others, you're competitive. You don't want to assume the responsibilities that go with leadership. You expect the leader to give everything to you, then you resent them for not doing that. That you want the ideal leader in the 4th paragraph who will make everything right for you, who is strong and powerful and benignly disposed toward you. But these conflicting attitudes toward leadership, I think we have to realize that we have these. At least it's good to meditate on our attitudes toward leaders. And then, of course, he says later in the same page, if you do not first assume leadership for your own life, you will naturally need a leader who takes on the governing of your life. So unless you're prepared to assert your own leadership, someone else will do it for you. And then the guide sort of comes to an interesting point at the end of page 2, which he touches on in a number of lectures, which is he basically says that we often are shortchanging ourselves. We don't really want to believe in our higher selves in the sense that we don't acknowledge the progress we've made spiritually. In other words, we're in a better place than we pretend that we are, right? Maybe it's the ego that doesn't want to realize or that doesn't want to acknowledge the spiritual growth that we've actually been responsible for in our own lives. He says, are you still in such an undeveloped, immature inner state that you require others to lead you? Or are you perhaps becoming ready to be a leader in your own right? You can start with your own life and from there go on to take the full responsibility for your planetary citizenship for being a bringer in of the new age. Second paragraph, and this reminds me of a lot of other lectures, he says, often, my dearest, most beloved friends, I see you stuck in attitudes that you have truly outgrown. This is very damaging. So what he intimates is that when we're struggling with our lower self or with our images and we're trying to find our way out of them, that's fine. But when we somehow regress and remain in these attitudes that we've outgrown, then that's negative. Too often you disclaim the truth that you are indeed much further in your development and no longer in a position in which you have to act out again and again attitudes that belonged to you years ago or perhaps months ago. In terms of spiritual measurements, these months are lifetimes, yet you insist on holding on to your old habits and stay where you no longer belong. Can anyone resonate with that? Hands up. Yeah, it's like we have the opportunity to claim the progress we've made, but we often don't want to do it. Then the guide discusses what leadership means. As I said, above anything else, quote, for a leader in the best sense of the word has to want to give unselfishly. Unselfish giving must truly exist in your smallest acts. It's not enough to be unselfish in theory, while you continue to practice pettiness, ungivingness, and selfishness in your everyday life, and even deny or project these negative attitudes onto others. If you do not want to give unselfishly, you cannot assert your leadership. A little later, he says, in another sense, true giving is demanded of you, for if you want the privileges of leadership, and there are many, the price is giving. Well, I have to agree. I mean, that sounds pretty straightforward to me. And the giving has to be unselfish. You know, you don't have to, you cannot set up an equation where you're only going to get something if you give something, even though it does work that way. So you have to give without resentment, not from an ulterior motive. Then on the top of page 4, the guide, I think, gives us what I would call meditation about giving, which actually, I think this is a beautiful way to start every day. I would quote this sentence here. I want to be an instrument of divine reality, to enrich the world through the divinity that wants to express itself through me. I want to do this not for my ego, aggrandizement, not for any other, nor for any other ulterior motive or advantage. I do think that if we were to say that first thing in the morning, that would probably help our day get going. It's really a beautiful statement. That thought, that attitude will actually bring you many advantages. It will give you the self-esteem and also the feeling of deserving and claiming the abundance you desperately grope for in faulty ways.
Can you repeat that again?
Sure. He says, I want to be an instrument of divine reality to enrich the world through the divinity that wants to express itself through me. I want to do this not for my ego, aggrandizement, nor for any other ulterior motive or advantage.
Thank you.
And later on the same page, he says, leadership in its real sense is built on the love of true giving and on the true giving of love. Very poetic.
Doesn't that the prayer that you doesn't that sound like Francis of Assisi, the prayer of
Yeah, that's right. Very much so. Right. The prayer, what's his prayer called again? There is, well, it's often called the prayer of St. Francis, right?
Yeah, just make me an instrument of thy peace.
Yes.
The first
Yes.
line, I don't
Yes.
know, may I seek
Yes.
to give rather than to
Very, very similar. Yes.
rather than to generally.
And then the guide goes on with another one of these big statements. Nothing can go wrong with that when that attitude exists. The second quality of leadership that the guide talks about here is the ability to be impartial and objective. And that, I think, is something that's commonly known and acknowledged, that leaders have to be fair and objective. Many leaders fall short of that, of course. But just as a judge should be impartial, you know, a leader needs to be able to see his own BS so that he can then not be swayed or influenced by personal considerations when he makes a leadership decision. And the guide says, your pathwork trains you for this highly advanced state of honesty and fairness. You can by now quite easily admit how you have a stake in certain assumptions and do not want to believe differently. Right? I mean, the guide in one of the previous lectures we talked about speaks about being an advocate for the other. You know, you take the position of the other person fully. You embody what their position is, which is counter to your position. So you try to see exactly what their point of view is. So in other words, that is an experiment, an attempt to be honest and fair to a very high standard. And now the guide says, he also says that when you're trying to be impartial, and it's difficult to be impartial and objective, quote, it is truly a sign of greatness to know that you are, in this or that area, full of disturbing, turbulent emotions, full of conflict, and cannot therefore form an opinion. So it's much better to be able to admit that you have conflicting feelings about something than to pretend to be impartial or objective when you can't be. And if you have already attained in some manner a position of leadership, you can be toppled by the lack of this impartiality. You know, we've certainly seen that happen many times. Leader pretends to be impartial but isn't, and that turns out to be an Achilles heel. Not admitting it and claiming that you're free from personal stakes in proclaiming your opinions makes you very vulnerable. You must then guard and defend an unrightful position of leadership. So if you don't acknowledge your own conflicts about an issue, then you're become a hypocrite. And that means that you are vulnerable to losing legitimate leadership. All right. So in other words, only openness really works. That's the only solution to be a leader. You must be open and undefended. Then the third quality of leadership is the willingness to risk exposure and criticism. That's also pretty straightforward, right? If you fear and guard against it and yet grab for leadership because you like its advantages, the power and prestige, then again, you defeat the purpose. You create a painful conflict in yourself and you create frustration. True leadership cannot exist under these circumstances. And the final attribute thing one has to realize about leadership, quote, leadership means constant risk. So leadership is not something that you can run on automatic pilot, right? I mean, you have to continually be responsive, not only to the demands of the situation, but also you have to be involved in this process of examining your own motivations and being undefended and being willing to take criticism. All right, that's leadership. Then the second section of the lecture about frustration. Another absolutely essential quality of leadership that the infantile personality lacks and is unwilling to even consider is the proper attitude toward frustration. So, in a nutshell, the guide says that frustration can be a real gift and a real opening into a deeper awareness and a unitive state, but it's not so easy to get there. He talks about the dichotomy of frustration versus fulfillment. So the first thing is you have to resist what the guide calls the forcing current, which is I must have it for what you desire. And simultaneously an equally strong quote, I must not have it for its opposite. That means if you believe that, you're in a state of painful duality. And as we know, the guide sometimes, sort of like the Rolling Stones, you may not get what you want, but you'll get what you need. The guide says that if you sincerely desire something, that a fulfillment that's meant to come in your life, it will come to you, but maybe not in the way you think. Right, Marion? He says, you have to let go of the way what you are insisting on having will come to you. And then you can allow it to come to you. Now, then he gives 4 steps about dealing with frustration. The first one is to accept it. In other words, accept the frustrating circumstance. If what I experience is painful or undesirable, I will trust it anyway. I will trust my faculties to bear it, to relax into it, to learn from it, to handle it, and to make the best of it. I will learn a lesson from this particular frustration and will not act as if it were a catastrophe. That's the first step in dealing with frustration. He says you have to make room for relaxing your reaction of utter disgust and outrage about frustration, your fear and anger about it, and to challenge and question this reaction, to consider it as being possibly faulty and erroneous. I think that we can all relate to that. I mean, I certainly had circumstances in my life where I felt very frustrated about something. And then I realized I was looking at it, I had the wrong focus. I wasn't focused on the fact that I was focused on something where I couldn't let go created a frustration. But when I looked more deeply at it, at the roots of the frustration, I realized I could let it go. For example, trying to think of something job related. I wanted to have a particular project given to me, and it wasn't. And instead of getting all bent out of shape about it, I realized that I will still receive fulfillment and credit doing something different. Not to hold on to something rigidly. And maybe, as we've all experienced, the result is something even more positive than earlier would have happened. If I'm being clear about that. So he says frustration is a friend further on. Yeah, as I just mentioned, the second step is the next step on the ladder of learning to transcend frustration is the active, deliberate, and renewed search for the meaning of any particular frustration. That's a deep issue, right? The meaning of a frustration. And I've seen this happen, like in Pathwork groups, when people express anger, disgust at a particular frustration, it turns out that really their anger is not about that at all. It's misdirected. He says, there is no frustration that does not contain a joyful, valuable, liberating lesson for you. Most of the time, you're completely unwilling to consider such a possibility. You're so bent on battling the occurrence of frustration that the lesson gets lost and you pass by a valuable high mark on your path and opportunity. So you create the necessity for such opportunities to inevitably repeat themselves. They must come no matter how you battle against them. So being continuously frustrated by something is really a message, right? That somehow you're not seeing the opportunity within the frustration, either to let it go, shift your focus, learn something about yourself. There's a key in the frustration that can liberate. That's what the guide says. The third step on page 6, the discovery of the meaning of the frustration. For him who knocks, the door shall be opened. He who searches must find. The answer, the meaning, will always astound you. So to find out what the meaning is, you first have to experience the emotions of the frustration. And then sometimes in praying for guidance, I've seen this happen. You get a very interesting revelation about what the frustration really is about. It could be a conflict with somebody in your life. It could be a parental thing. But whatever it is, it's not really the issue that you're frustrated about. It's something else. Then the fourth step, he says, you can begin to practice something very beautiful. You know, at least theoretically, that the reality of God exists in every fraction of second in time, in every fraction of measurement, in every fraction of experience, in everything that is. Divine reality, in its great, joyous truth and aliveness and meaningfulness and purposefulness, lives in everything that is, that ever was, that ever will be. So if you let yourself fully experience that point of frustration, he says, after you have learned the lesson it has to teach, and flow with it, go with it, accept it, embrace it, completely reverse your attitude from rejecting to accepting it, What you will experience will surpass your imagination. So he's really talking about here, as in many other lectures, the experience of the unified state, where the apparent opposites, the thing you deeply desire and the thing you deeply desire not to experience merge. And then you experience that feeling of timelessness. So in the middle of that, page 6, he says, this is your road, my friends. This is what many of you now need. I'm not saying that every rightful leader in the positive sense has totally transcended frustration in this way, but I will say that to the degree true leadership exists, the attitude toward frustration is fairly mature and realistic, and no longer a feeling of outraged insult. So that's how leadership and frustration connect. Then the guide summarizes the lecture in a paragraph, which is really a recapitulation of the whole Pathwork process. He says, at times, my friends, you still go around complaining about this or that unhappiness or unfulfillment, choosing not to connect with those very attitudes. They are the creators of your unfulfillment and frustrations. With your unwillingness to expose yourself to the possibility of being frustrated, you confine your life to very narrow limits and make yourself unnecessarily vulnerable in a brittle way. And then this key sentence, when you free yourself of the impediments of selfishness, of the insistence to never experience frustration, of unlovingness and ungivingness, of ego aggrandizement, of jealousy and resentments, when you give up your lack of impartiality, your bias and one-sidedness, then you have removed major obstructions to your fulfillment. So I really think that in this paragraph, in this sentence, the guide really recapitulates the Pathwork process in a nutshell, right? We have to experience our frustration. We have to experience our unlovingness, ungivingness, desire to aggrandize our egos, jealousy, resentments, partiality. We have to experience those things so that we can then move beyond them. Then the guide says that to be a leader doesn't necessarily mean to have a prominent position in the world. Leadership does not always take the form of visible outer manifestation. It also exists in more subtle ways. So then, to wrap up the lecture, the guide says, I implore you, my dearest friends, be where you really can be now. So what that means, I think, is the guide is recapping the discussion earlier about that we have accomplished a lot that we don't acknowledge. We have done a lot of transformational work. We have done a lot of self-searching. We've made a lot of recognitions. So when he says, be where you really can be now, what that means is that taking responsibility for the work that we have done and being able to move out from that place of acknowledging the work that we have done. Your goodwill, your serious attempt to become who you are already in this respect is now possible. And I want to close with just the last paragraph of the guide's lecture, which I thought was very kind of moving. It's a very loving paragraph from the guide that it kind of struck me that you don't see it that much in these lectures. He says, let me part from you. I'm picking up this dog here, if you don't mind. Puppy boy. Let me part from you in manifestation only. For I'm always here, close to you and loving every one of you dearly and deeply, as we all do in our world, who are so concerned with the beautiful creation you are part of. So I say, be blessed, rejoice, and have faith that your life is a glory and will be a more and more glorious fulfillment. Be blessed, my beloved ones. I mean, that just strikes me as really, very intimate, really. I'm always here, close to you and loving every one of you dearly and deeply. That's That's moving. I don't really, the guide often doesn't say things like that. It's very personal, seems to me. So that's the lecture.
Wasn't it interesting, Alan, that the dog came over at exactly the time that you were reading that and kissed you and gave you love?
Well, this is a very loving dog.
And you know what dog is spelled backwards, right?
Oh my goodness. Are you kidding? That's a revelation, Joel. Everything is now clear to me. And live spelled backwards is evil too. That's really profound too. Yeah. Anyway, my friends, so I was just, I think it's a really common experience for all of us to have this kind of battle with frustration, right? And I think that the guide's words in this lecture really illuminate frustration and make it more bearable. Or don't you? Thoughts? Yeah. Tracy, I kept thinking about you when I was reading this lecture because, you're a leader and you've had to deal with a lot of frustration, right? Because I read your book, Inflection Point, about your struggles in the corporate world, where there is a lot of competition and competitiveness and frustration. So why did you pick this lecture, may I ask?
Well, the same way I always pick them, it's like just go into a meditative state and a number appears to me and then I check it out and you know how we do it. And then I run it by you. And so I don't,
Yeah.
it's definitely not anything that I choose. It's kind of something that just comes to me but when I saw it, I thought, this is a good lecture. We haven't done it. And especially for today's world, because, we've got a lot of not so good leadership going on around the world right now. And what the thing about this lecture that really struck me, funny you should bring up my corporate days, because it reminded me very much of what happened to me in my 30 years at Pfizer. When I first started, I wasn't a leader. I wasn't a chief. I was an Indian, and all day long I was given assignments by the other leaders, and I had to, sit at my desk and produce work product. And as I started to have people reporting to me, the amount of time that I was able to actually do work was directly reduced to the number of people that were reporting to me. And by the end of my career, all I could do all day long was take care of my people. And it was totally selfless. And I had to stay in a loving space the entire time because, with lots of people reporting into you, there's a lot of everybody, who's been in this situation knows what I'm talking about. It's very much like being a parent. They squabble and then everybody comes to you and, this one, Mikey hit me. So you have to maintain impartiality. And one of the main things I was struck with during this time was that, two people would have some sort of disagreement about something, they'd come running to me sort of to arbitrate. And it was always as if they were not in the same space. And they just saw this conflict from completely different ends of the telescope, and there the two shall meet. And I remember having the first sort of, aha moment about how people, they just perceive the same, what we would consider the same situation very differently because they're looking at it from different perspectives. And I wasn't into, spiritual journey of any significance back then. I was too busy, being out there in the world, but it penetrated me. And so when I read this lecture, it reminded me of how a good leader is very selfless. And I was able to, of course I was also able to see who wasn't a good leader. And one characteristic that they all shared was they were being selfish. Instead of taking care of their chickens, they were busy doing things for their own aggrandizement and to bolster their own ego. And it's not necessarily something malevolent. It was just self-focused, selfish kind of has a more of a negative connotation, but a self-focused. So for example, one man who was, reporting into me, but very high up also in the group I was in, he is a brilliant man, one of the nicest people ever, but he wasn't a good leader because he didn't take care of the people that were reporting to him at all. He was very busy doing exactly what he wanted to do, and which was traveling around. He liked to travel around and like go to these different conferences and stuff, but which was great. I mean, and he did a fabulous job representing Pfizer's interest in these different conferences that he was, but the bottom line is he wasn't there. And if you're not, and it's like being a parent, very hard to be an absentee parent. At the end of the day, time in is very important. And the same thing with being a leader. So I just reading this lecture and relating it to what it was like for me, sort of really in a different incarnation, because, when I was at Pfizer, I was in a very different bubble of reality. The guy talks about we're all in our own bubbles of reality. And, my bubble of reality then was nothing like what it is now. So that led to further reflection, which is just that at the end of the day, whenever we're in a self-focused consciousness, by definition, our focus and our energy is going towards ourselves rather than out to the people. And like you said, just the dog. You were able to, you're in the middle of trying to summarize the lecture. You're into a part where you were extremely moved by what the guide was saying, which I agree with you. It was very moving and very unusual way for the guide to end, and personal. And the dog, like Joel said, probably felt this energy and wanted your attention. And he wanted, right then and there, you were able to, pick the dog up and he was kissing your ear. So this is a kind of, but you were in a leadership position at that moment. You were concluding being the leader of this group and explaining, as you always do so beautifully, each lecture, but yet still you were open to the fact that, and the dog isn't even a person. It's a dog, but he needed something from you at that point. So you never can come out of that role of, it's really sort of like a parental role. You just always surveying and making sure everybody's okay. And the focus of your energy is always going out and not self-focused. So that's why when I hit on it, with my meditation, and then I read it, because, once I get a number in my head, then I read it, obviously, to see. I thought, oh, this is good for the time, because, without naming any names, the leaders that we have, the leaders that we have, some of the leaders that we have going in the world right now, everything is about them. And they're not good for what they're not producing anything positive. Au contraire, they're producing destruction and, hate and evil. And then you can contrast that to somebody like Queen Elizabeth and how she spent all of her life basically, with her energy going to others. So, anyway, I think at this point I'm rambling. It's somebody else's turn.
Frustration. Does anyone want to talk about their experiences with frustration?
I'd like to, I guess it's more ask questions about leadership and frustration. When one finds oneself in a leadership role and the frustration is with the others who either don't want to be led or don't understand the task, or are almost in a state of, kind of destroying rather than building. And that's, I don't know, I find myself in that position often, and then I shy away from leadership again. Like I dip my toe into it and things start happening and then I jump back out.
Well, what I take from that is ego aggrandizement. As long as your ego is not involved, you're in a better position to be a leader or to do what you can in a situation like that. I mean, isn't it so that we often believe we're profiting from people's dissension, disagreement? You know, like Trump allegedly liked to pit people against each other, against each other in his cabinet, or in a group,
Right.
have people compete and fight, and then like, you know, the best will win out or whatever it is, which is really a very destructive way to be a leader. If you're not profiting from their dissension and their disagreement, well, at least you're in a better position to evaluate it and to be impartial, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Joel? I know you've been an arbitrator.
So,
recently.
I just go back to the question of frustration. One of the challenges I've faced for many years was managing or controlling my anger. And I was fortunate to have a psychiatrist early on who explained to me that anger comes from frustration, which comes from expectation. So if I was to wind it back and see what was I expecting, that would help to see what was the cause of my frustration. And frustration, which is left unattended, can easily lead to anger. And so the question of frustration, if one considers, well, what is it that I'm expecting here, right? And of course, it's difficult if in the particular moment, unless we're very aware of ourselves, to try to uncover it. You know, maybe just simply be enough to recognize that we are feeling frustrated and we have a choice, right? We don't, I was returning something to Lowe's today and they were having difficulty completing the transaction, and I found myself getting frustrated. And I realized that, you know, I had an expectation that it should be quick, that it should be simple. And then you know, when I reminded myself, you know, this is an opportunity to practice being present in the moment without expectation, and to, you know, to be loving and kind and patient, and not to be childlike with my expectation. Now I'm going to be in and out of here in 5 minutes. Maybe my positive, it was about being in a positive state and sharing that positive energy with in that space to the people that were there, right?
Yeah. The guide says on page 6, your assumption that you have to manipulate reality around you to suit your most infantile misconceptions and unreal needs for instant gratification.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Can I chime in now?
please go ahead, Barbara.
I'm from a totally different kind of orientation, in the sense that, you know, I have been a caregiver my entire life. You know, I've taken care of my children, my husband, my parents. Now I'm taking care of my grandchildren, still taking care of my husband. I mean, this isn't my entire life, but it's something that drives me, and that I do a lot of giving for other people. And the thing that I sometimes feel is that I forget about myself. And you know, it reminds me of the Hillel quote, you know, if I'm only, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? You know, so I just, you know, I don't know if it really relates to this, but it's just sort of like one of the things that comes to me hearing this. In my position as the matriarch, and as I find that that there's no problem too big or too small that can't be helped by open, honest conversation. Finding out, let's get to the bottom of it. But it also seems to, it reminds me of some of the Pathwork, Bataka work, because sometimes it involves a lot of expression of anger, frustration, and sort of like getting that energy out. So I guess those were the things that I wanted to add to the conversation. I don't know if they, I guess I've had other instances where I've been in a leadership position in terms of curating art shows or being parts of organizations, and I find that I function okay with those, but because of I tend to shy away and would rather work in my studio making my own art, and so that usually when I'm part of an organization, I feel like I really want to contribute and I really want to give something, and once I feel like I've fulfilled that part, I want to withdraw, go back. So that's just me personally. But I know when Mary Jane was talking, one of the things I really responded when you had talked about being maybe being a leader and not having the people follow you. I think that making a stand is being a leader. And it doesn't, people may not, they'll come round perhaps. You are being a leader by standing up for your values. And so those are my random thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah.
I agree. You do take a stand, and you are a leader as long as your ego's not in it, as long as you're impartial and objective, I think, or try to be, and as long as you're giving, right? You have those three qualities, and I think you are a leader no matter what the other people do.
I was also struck by this lecture, thinking back to the history of, I wasn't particularly, involved in any leadership time, but I think it was at the time when, maybe Marion remembers more about how, people were stepping up and talking about making a commitment. Where are you? Maybe sort of like a certain kind of confrontational way of, saying, are you going to step up? And then it's sort of striking, Alan, that this lecture is coming about when you're having this movement towards, bringing back the New York Pathwork. And, that's definitely, an idea of, throwing out that there's room for leadership and stepping up.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, you were there
Mhm.
way back there, and you were too, Marion. We were all at the Pathwork Center together for years. Yeah. Marion.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing. Everybody for sharing. So I think my leadership now is in sharing. I'm not running any programs, just my own life. And but this lecture is, as they all do, so many other lectures that are connected. And I'm always promoting the personality types of reason, will, and emotion, the defense types of the spin on the higher self. And that is, so I can share that frustration, I sometimes have a hard time getting to frustration and even feeling it, because I can feel it in my gut, kind of down in below my waist, kind of down there. And so I notice these energy experiences before maybe the actual frustration comes out. So I'm very grateful for that in the energy work. So what I'm finding is, since last year, I went through, and some of you know this, 3 near-death experiences within 7 months through a hit-and-run accident, blood clot, lung surgery, and a stroke. And then after that, someone tried to get into my bank, and for hours, I thought they were my bank, and it was a scammer. And so the trauma that I've been through, I'm still in recovery, and recovery is a process that leads into the next stages. So what I found is that I really like that with my personality type, my main one is emotion. So that's kind of the lens I look through. And in order to get to frustration and what I do with frustration, so someone else who has a different dominant personality type is going to be different for me. So for me, I need to get to that energy by going through first, I'll notice where I'm depressed, just feeling depressed, the lid's on everything. And what I like it's the Abraham Hicks work about the ladder of negative emotions going up it, because I'm not going to go from depression to joy in like a snap of a finger. I need some steps, and frustration is in there, because when I'm feeling kind of depressed and down about all the things I have to do to take care of myself and do my daily living, is the next step up. And I just love it, is revenge. Revenge precedes frustrations. And so me being the emotion type and the good girl type and the pleasing type, when I get to revenge, I start waking up. My hands are on my hip. And if it's, let's say, some couple of old friends, since I've gone through all my traumas and my mask has fallen off, a lot of my old friendships don't fit. And so it's like, what am I going to do with them? I want to throw them all off the bridge somewhere. These are people I've known for 55 years. So fortunately, in getting to revenge, where I can really do my energy work, and I can, whatever, knock them on the head with a baseball bat or whatever is my creative way of bringing that out. Because then when I go up next, it's going to be hatred and anger and then frustration. So I know that when I'm stuck in some of these other areas, to get to frustration where I can start making choices, I need to go through those levels and layers. Now, if I'm just right there at frustration, fine, I can skip all those other steps. But I'm finding it comes up since my mask has dropped so much of fakeness and I'm more authentic, I'm having to deal with starting even a little bit before frustration. And so, because when I'm in frustration, I can start choosing, I can start seeing where my higher self is, where my lower self is. I can step back a moment. But until then, I can't. So I'm grateful for just the knowing of what precedes frustration so that I get to more choice and more connection with my higher self. So that's just a brief sharing about.
That's very interesting, that ladder.
Yeah. Yes, because then after frustration, it goes up to some like sort of considering, and then maybe some considering certain oppositions, and then it might be up to love isn't the high love, and then it will end up eventually joy, because joy is both sides of duality have come together to the unified state. So it'll go up to love and acceptance and to joy. So I know I'll get there if I go through all those steps. Yeah.
Thank you. Stephen, what are your thoughts about frustration? And also, thanks a lot for responding to my email about the organization.
I'll give you the $5 after the webinar.
Okay. It's on the website.
Anyway, two words are interesting: leader and frustration. Maybe I was a frustrated leader. I guess like Tracy, I worked for major organizations too, in particular Philip Morris, if anybody likes cigarettes, and the other Colgate-Palmolive for many, many years in their international division. And I was the director of information technology, mostly through Latin America, but globally. And it required constant travel for many years, but especially in Latin America. I was a leader without knowing I was a leader because I came from my heart. I learned the language and I just really loved the people. And it wasn't work for me, it was joy. And I truly felt elevated. And so did the people. It was almost mystical. And when I'd arrive at a place, my Spanish got pretty good. I'd arrive and I'd see them after a long flight, like to Brazil, especially Chile, which was one of my favorites. It was just a wonderful, it was like welcome home. And it was a constant welcome home each time I arrived. And I miss that. I still do miss it, even though I've been retired for quite a few years. And I think I try to emulate that and maintain it, as Guan would know, because I married a Dominican and a wonderful woman. My marriage was short-lived, more my fault than hers. But yet we're still good friends, and I'm sure Guan will attest to that. The area of frustration, I've always had problems with frustration, of not accepting it, not wanting it. It shouldn't be this way, on and on and on. And I think frustration is really based on fear. And I think so much is based on fear, at least in my life. And fear is so much based on annihilation that if I don't get what I want, I'm frustrated because, in essence, I have to get what I want or I can't live. So, frustration was, and maybe less now, a large part of my life. And rather than experience it, which was a very, very difficult thing to do, I would see the outside world causing the frustration, and I would attack that, which only ended up in annihilating my relationships, including my marriage, and making me more frustrated because I could not find any relief in my frustration. And as a child, as a frustrated child, my relief was food, and I gained a lot of weight, and I wouldn't allow myself now to go that route. Um, so I still experience that frustration, but the major difference is I'm able to witness the frustration, and the frustration points its finger still to the outside world. And if only I could eliminate this relationship or that relationship, or go to somewhere else, or go somewhere else geographically, that frustration will go. And I know that's not true. And that thought that that's not true, that it's all within me, that there is no easy fix. There really is no easy fix. The only fix, if there is one, is to be with it, to face it, and accept it for what it is. And I find that to be extremely difficult. Extremely. I can only be with it, depending upon the frustration, for a short time, then I bounce out of it. And Buddhism helps to some extent too, breathing, Qigong, and all that. And none of that counters pathwork. It all seems to be in alignment, which is really quite wonderful. So I think the major change with my frustration is I know it's my MY frustration. It's not because of you or anybody else. It's the way the world is set up. It's taking my medicine and accepting it, and not invoking a higher source telling him or her that you screwed up. I could have made a better job down here and designed it better than you because there's a lot of pain down here. And then when I realize, if I look at a tree or a flower, or even experience my own body with the thousands of different processes that are going on that I have absolutely no idea what's happening in my body, but it's kept me alive decades, then there must be some process beyond that. If I can only be part of it and have confidence in it, and that's a big thing, to have confidence in it and not be willful and say, I'll do it myself, but accept that there is a higher energy. I think my life and my acceptance of frustration would be much easier. And that's what I'm working on. I guess it's never ending. Maybe my next life. But anyway.
Thank you. Trying to grow into the unit of state. We all are. Yeah. Get more and more glimpses as time of it.
All right, I'll share a little bit
Oh,
myself.
okay.
Let talk.
Oh.
I'm loud. Just like many others, though many of you guys who have already spoken, I was also a leader, in one of the most, I consider one of the most difficult environment. And I can really identify with, with both topics in this lecture, because one really is connected with the other. And I can really say and testify that I have very grossly experienced both of them. I mean, I think, in the end, the way I see it, in the end, really, it's the ego that really complicates everything and makes everything so difficult. In my case, I find that, as the guide in the other lecture, the one that you guys actually went through last Thursday, that unfortunately I couldn't make it, pride, fear, and self-will, I find that, that my main weakness, I guess I can say, is that my problem in life, as I can observe now, is that I have been driven strongly by fear and self-will. And that is it's just like the base for all frustrations. Because I found myself, whenever things wouldn't go my way, I'll be just frustrated because I wanted to control everything out of fear. I wanted to have that control. I wanted to feel that I was in charge. So when that wasn't the case, which realistically speaking rarely is, because we have very little control of things, in this world. So I find myself struggling, fighting a lot and struggling with this problem, especially at work, as being a leader in an environment where it was very difficult. I had all kinds of cultural background, and then I was the leader in this unionized environment where, on one hand, you have your superior who expects you to do and execute everything he tells you exactly the way he tells you. And then on the other hand, you have these other people who are unionized and want to have things their way also. So you're kind of in the middle there, as you really probably can testify to that, Alan, because I think you're kind of in that position yourself. And so you are in the middle here. So you really have to have this, non-attachment and this impartial attitude if you are to function in a healthy way. So I found myself in that position many, many times. But like the lecture explains, though, I really find that when you act selfishly, you don't act from your own desire to be out there, to be recognized, and for your ego to be aggrandized, and having that stake for yourself is so much easier. I mean, contrary to many people, even a lot of my co-workers, my chefs, fellow chefs there, whenever they come out, I mean, I was in charge, for example, of the kitchen of the Hilton. That it's over 1,000 rooms there, not to count the penthouses, which is like two of them there, the east and the west, and all kinds of important VIP event took place there, from Bill Clinton to Mark Anthony or Michael Jackson's, and I had to oversee all those functions and all these parties for these people, and and do it with the staff that I had, who was a very unwilling staff. They will really wanted to have their way always, and if you get paid for 7 hours, they just wanted to work 3 of them, and and God forbid that you demand from them more than that. And so I found myself in that spot. But as I was saying, whenever I act without involving my ego, it was okay. I received the credits and the recognition that I never really wanted, and so much more in a much greater way. For example, I will make a great menu for the rooms or for a special party, of course, my boss, he was a big ego guy, of course, as is usually the case with his superiors in these places. So he will come and, he will get all the stuff, and I would do all the prep and, and set up the dishes and make all the dice and chop and dice and, and give it to him and, set everything for him. He will come and these VIP people will be there, all of them, and who will come and do a little show off here and there and take all the credit for all the work that I have done all along for days and hours, hours and days. And, I'll just be, okay, I'll just be in the back of the stage, like, okay, let him have it, let him do his thing. So anyway, to make the long story short, this is the way it works. I really have experienced this thing, but when it comes to frustration, I mean, that was big for me because, as I said, fear and self-will, as I recognize now, have been my big issue. And, even waiting for the train, if the train is supposed to come, 5 minutes earlier and it doesn't come, and it's 5 minutes late, then I am frustrated and boiling. And, and like, I don't know, because I wanted to live. I was like, why is it not that way? It was meant to be that way. It had to be that way. Like I must have it, like the guy says here, I must have it my way. And then it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. So, it's very, very, it has been a very, very learning experience for me to work with these two issues. But I have found, as is usually the case when it comes to this, as Stephen was saying, when you accept this defect, when you accept this abnormality or these issues that come to the surface for that specific reason, for you to observe it and just to live through it and just sit with it rather than blaming somebody else or blaming God or trying to force things to be differently, or pretend even that oh, it's not there, this is okay, oh, this happened to everybody, or blah blah blah. Try to excuse it, but just really, really sitting with it, facing, experiencing, living through it. Then I have been able to overcome a lot, and and every time it comes up, because it still does, these frustrations and and desire to control everything, I just observe it and I just feel it. And it works magic. It works magic, really. So it's a beautiful thing. So again, thank you to Tracy for selecting and Alan for selecting this lecture, because it really is, it comes at the right time, as they usually do. But this one is a very, very good one. That there's so much here, as you said, Alan, that a lot, and many of the pathwork concepts are incorporated in this lecture, and and it's so beautifully done too. And I'm touched like you, Alan and Tracy, at the end when the guy speaks like this. I felt like it was Jesus talking to when he talked like that. In the end, it's like I've always, like Jesus said at the end, I will always be with you till the end of the world. To his disciples. That's how I felt when the guy actually says goodbyes. It's a goodbye in this lecture, and I think it was so loving. I even wrote it like underneath, like a note, footnote, like, oh, so lovingly, glory to God, to myself, because I thought it was really, really beautiful the way the guy actually, departed in this lecture. So thank you all very much for sharing with me.
Ellen, did you want to say something?
It's always a little humbling after Juan speaks, though, because but everybody, well, I felt that when Stephen was the end of the bit, when Stephen was speaking, I was finding myself having this feeling of awakening, this, and I was thinking about how, in our society, it's like everything, all of the popular culture is based on manifesting what I want. Right? It's all about, what do I want? How can I get what I want? And when I was reading the lecture, I was thinking about leadership and just like all different paradigms of leadership and what leadership means, and different types of leadership, and parental leadership, and organizational leadership, and leadership within, like all the different ways that leadership manifests in the world. But that but that our ideas about leadership is based on, like, well, in a certain area it would be like, based on, getting people to be able to have what they want, right? So then this leads me to the quote in the lecture that you read, which I'd like to just read it again. It was just about God. Um, um, it's right here. On page 6. Give me one sec. Oh yeah, okay. You know, at least theoretically, that the reality of God exists in every fraction of second in time, in every fraction of every measurement, in every fraction of experience, in everything that is, whether it be an entity, a being, creation, an object, an experience. Divine reality in its great, joyous truth and aliveness and meaningfulness and purposefulness lives in everything that is, that ever was, and that will ever be. I said these words before. I deliberately repeat them here, for they apply to frustration as well. And I read this because I I so often say that, like, I feel like my whole life has just been frustration, right? And I say that a lot. And so the lecturer said, and Ellen, you repeated that we don't, I'm not sure now how it's said, but it's like that we don't give ourselves credit.
Right. We don't allow the work that we have done to sink in,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
the ego doesn't want to, the ego isn't operating on that axis anyway.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
the ego's on the Z axis and that's on the X axis, and it just don't want to see it.
yeah. Because it was really interesting, when I went to talk, and Juan, it spoke up first, but the first thing Juan said was about ego, and then I smiled because I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I needed to hear that first. um, but yeah, and uh, yeah, I didn't really, when I first looked at what the lecture was, I really, I was, I guess because I very easily go to criticism with everything, I suppose. I don't really realize, and it's so funny because I do that with the lectures all the time. I'm always whenever I look at the lecture, it's like, oh yeah, that again, that thing I don't like, and that thing I don't like, and that.
Hmm.
And most frequently I come to the meetings because I love coming to the meetings, and I always get something really wonderful out of them. But I guess I felt that I needed to out myself a little bit. Just, I don't realize, like, my own ego, my own criticism, judgments, criticism. I'm doing some stuff in my life that's pointing it up to me more how I'm I'm ruled by those things more than I realize, like,
Mm.
particularly self-judgment, self-criticism. But then, of course, you can't be continually criticizing and judging yourself without doing it and to everybody else in the world as well. Um, so and of course, and in terms of leadership, I feel like, leadership is just being a leader, well, a leader for yourself. Maybe you can be a leader in a small group of friends just by having integrity, just being loving, being caring, and being, like, as you're just talking about, being of service. And Barbara was, speaking of all the service, and I have a sister who's, in service. I'm like the baby, I feel like I'm always the one who's being taken care of and not being in service. And I want to be in service. I don't want to, you know, I'm a performer, I'm a musician. It's like it's all about giving something to the world. Um, and I know I'm rambling now. I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but um, and I guess I also want to verbalize that I feel like, you know, the stuff with physical illness is like a big way in which I'm manifesting my resistance
Mm.
to being um, to using my growth to manifesting the growth, which I have. You know, there's definitely a lot. A lot is here, um, and yeah. I mean, I guess I'm just really struck by the message of acceptance. You know, that if I can be with this thing that I most push away, which is frustration, that the lecture is telling me that you know that's the key, is to go in to that place. And a number of people here today have said it too. You know, the experience of awakening as you accept this thing that you just want to push away and say, I don't want this. So,
Ellen,
yeah.
I'm curious, do you feel frustration when you have to learn music?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do, and I frequently will break through for a while, and then I will usually leave it because I get to that point where I've become saturated. There, yeah, it's they do great for a while, you know. New things come into my life, and then you always I come up against a wall. But I'm still a pretty good musician, but I'm not as good a musician as I could have been. I'd like to be. Anyway, yeah.
It's a process.
It's a process. It's
Yeah,
a
I guess I relate because, you know, I'm an artist, and sometimes, I mean, just in terms of frustration, sometimes I think to myself, man, I like hitting my head against the wall, you know, because, you know, I'm trying to do something impossible. And, you know, eventually, you know, it works out. But that's what I was relating, like in terms of like learning music and following a pattern and aspiring to something. And I guess even what Joel was saying, you know, wanting something to be something that isn't there yet, or not the way it is at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the thing about being an artist is that, you know, that it makes me think of the quote, you know, what is it, the Martha Graham quote, you know, the famous quote, Agnes DeMille, Martha Graham, you know, that divine, there's a divine dissatisfaction, you know, that's, you know, there's, you guys know it, that, you know, there's a, you know, an artist is never satisfied, you know, and then it's this, you know, fantastic quote that with this conversation between Agnes DeMille and Martha Graham. You know, and it's always great to remember that, you know, that's what this lecture is saying, you know, to find God in the frustration.
And just be human.
Right, and just be human. Oh, of that.
Well, it's, you know, I'm going to thank you so much, all of you, sharing that, because in that creative process, there's always a no, because I separate, just so I can look at them. My human self is always going to resist expansion, always. That's part of being human. So when I'm expanding into something, I'm drawing something, painting something, I'm creating something, or even tending my flowers, my plants, my human self will resist it. The key is not resisting the resistance, but hearing what she has to say, because the guide taught us this. There's a yes and a no in everything. Everything we're doing, there's a yes and a no, and they both need a voice. Not being in charge, the no not taking over, but listening to what the no has to say. To every time I want to sit down and write my book, I get a no. And so I really need support for my yes, but also to listen to my no. What real need is not being met that the no can give me a clue about? So I just want to throw that in, because the human, total identification with human is total suffering. And it'll always have a resistance to expansion. But when we have both going, then we've got the key to living so harmoniously on earth. Yeah. And I think you both, music, art, you're actually conveying this, what you do to really express these through your channel, your creative channels, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I found the quote. There is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated through you into action. And because there's only one of you at all time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and it will be lost. Later on, there is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There's only a queer divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than the others.
Put
Yeah.
it on my website, actually. I love it so much.
Well, so we're about at the end of our evening. Teresa, did you want to say something? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I don't want to prolong much because I know we're almost at time, but I wanted to completely thank Joel, because what he said really struck me very deeply, that when we have an expectation, I had two things today where I also was returning towels that Macy sent me unnecessarily and some other stuff, and it took a long time. And it was so frustrating, and I had other stuff to do. And then I said to myself, why am I so frustrated with them? And exactly when you were saying this, it hit me. I had an expectation that this is going to go so quick and so easy, and it didn't. And just being aware of it, you really helped me. And the way I combated it, I was just saying, well, okay, I have a few other things going on, but this is a very nice woman. Can I give her a few more minutes? And I just observed my frustration, but knowing that this was based on the expectation, yeah, it should be quick, helps me a lot, because I get that a lot. I get very frustrated with customer service, with those automatic voicemails and stuff like that. I cannot get to the human. I get so frustrated. I literally want to throw the phone out of the window, and then why? And that's the thing. I'm expecting this to be easy and to have a human interaction, and it's not. So this was super helpful. Thank you. Regarding frustration. And regarding the leadership, I just started a new position literally 2 weeks ago. It's a position of leadership in a very highbrow company.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And my decision going in there was automatically, I will lead with love. I will lead with love. And I tell you, for the 2 weeks that I spent, I never felt more successful at the job, because every time I go to a high power meeting where I have to lead the team, and it's a very difficult technology-based project, I remind myself, it's not for you. It's not for you. You're here to lead with love. You're here to lead with love. And as soon as I go in with that expectation, like the whole thing is just almost like divinely guided. People step up, they bring charts. I wasn't understanding the data flow. The engineer comes in and shows a drawing, and this person explains this to me, or that person explains that to me. And I'm like, whoa, this is amazing, how collaborative people are. But that, I think it's only due to the fact that I pray before every meeting to my God and Guru. I said, let me put my ego aside. Let me lead with love. Let me lead with love, because love is the only thing that can change people and influence people. And also that's the only energy that people can feel free and creative and productive. And, of course, self-love. And then, my love to support them, and not to drive it through with my ego is the biggest fight I have. I always had in any job. And it looks like finally, towards the end of my career, I'm getting it. That you can only lead with love. And when you do, when you authentically do, and you authentically put your ego at the door, people step up and things just come out, and then I have a very good satisfaction because people thank me for organizing that. But what I think they really thank me is for getting the egos out of the way and just, leading with very humble, admitting what I don't know, asking for help, and basically, humbly leading with love. So that's actually even before this lecture. And this lecture is just like so wise with this, because this gives a deeper sense of satisfaction. It's like, yeah, I accomplished through this, but I drag everybody through mud, No, just be humble and lead with love and open up. Do what you can, prepare it as best as you can. But like what Tracy was also saying, prepare it for others. Prepare it for others, not for your own, recognition. And then, like you are a humble servant to them, but they feel it. They know it. Like subconsciously, they really grasp it. And I think that's what real leadership is all about. And that's why I'm excited, even though I'm scared because the job is so difficult. I'm excited because I made a decision. In this job, in this company, I'm just going to lead with love. And if I can stay true to this, I think that, I have longevity here and I'm going to enjoy what I do. And thank you.
That's great. It's great to hear that, Teresa. Really. That's great. I know I remember when you were unsatisfied with the job that you had before and
Thank you.
conflict with people at work. And
Oh, it was terrible.
it sounds like you've done a beautiful job of mustering your intention, your positive intention, Yeah.
I manifested it somehow. I don't even know how, Alan. It was my biggest manifestation dream that I do find something that I'm really good at, but I also can be used in some creative way. So thank you.
I hear the peace in your voice, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that gives the peace. That gives the peace. And I didn't even realize how ego driven I really was at these other positions, but that's the norm, that's the standard. And I think when you have the intention and you make that decision, you really start operating from a different place.
Okay. So shall we have our meditation? Tracy, do you have a
I just
candle?
want to say Teresa's growth is very inspiring. I remember hearing her
is.
speak too. Thank you, Teresa. Really,
It is.
really wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Yeah, I would say that's a great approach, Teresa. You're going to get great results from that approach, I'm sure. So keep up, keep it up, keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good job, Teresa.
Yeah, and I'll touch base very quickly. I'm sorry if I may allow the 1 second here in alignment to what something that you shared earlier, and also what Marianne shared. Not resisting the resistance, and that's one of the points that I really struck me when when the guy said, "Frustration is a friend, my friends. You can make it a friend by courageously and intelligently wishing to explore its meaning and allowing it to be your teacher and your therapist, as it were." So the way I see it is like, that's really the approach. So it's really not what happens to us, it's the attitude with which we approach what happens to us. I mean, even these frustrations and all these discomfort that we can experience in those harsh moments, if we approach it with the right attitude, not resisting it, but seeing it as the teacher and the therapist that is meant to be, then we will be successful in whatever it is that we have to face. So it's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
Yeah, Alan, if I could just offer a short prayer before the meditation, following on what Juan said, that I have it when I face difficulty. I have a simple prayer, and I'd say, 'cause I still speak to God, and I say, please, Lord, help me to see what it is that I'm supposed to learn from this difficulty, and may I be released from it as quickly as possible. Thy will be done.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a beautiful prayer.
It helps me a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tracy, you've got a candle, so let's meditate for 10 minutes. And I'll read this paragraph on page 4. Giving is a very simple act, which includes also the thought and the intentionality behind the act. In true giving, you state, I want to be an instrument of divine reality to enrich the world through the divinity that wants to express itself through me. I want to do this, not for my ego aggrandizement, nor for any other ulterior motive or advantage. That thought, that attitude will actually bring you many advantages. It will give you the self-esteem and also the feeling of deserving and claiming the abundance you desperately grope for in faulty ways. That attitude must prevail as an underlying, overall, and all permeating inner climate. All right, 10 minutes.